Okay, hi guys. So we are gonna start tackling new topic, political economy of development, and we are gonna have three lectures on this topic. So this one and the Thursday one and the one to make up for the one we have missed in the Easter, perhaps on Friday. Um, so the question we are tackling this lecture is we are trying to investigate or to look into the role of the state in the economy since like the Nasser or the free officers took over power in 1952 and then till perhaps at the end of the 70s when Sadat initiated the open door or the Infitah policies. So like a quick overview because we examined in in some detail the corporatist and the authoritarian corporatism in Egypt and under Sadat and under Nasser. But quick revision how actually the free officers regime managed to restructure the relationship between state and society and to reshape this or to take control or to monopolize the interest representation in Egypt. So the most important the two important actors that are pretty much relevant to this week topic are like business communities or business associations and trade unions or laborers. So he actually initiated or it took like several steps in order to come up with or to impose the Unified Labor Code in 1959 that actually established this pyramid structure of trade unions and then like the amendment of the trade union law number 62 of 1964 in order to regulate the membership and the employment of different occupational sectors. So according to the new law that the first one actually established or monopolized the representation of the several trade unions and created this federal body in order to represent the whole like trade unions and different occupational sectors. And then the amended one it actually obliged the kind of it actually it offered kind of a representation in the management board. It offered workers kind of representation in the management board and reduced the weekly hours to 42 hours, I think, and then doubled the minimum wage. It offered more concessions and more inducements to the labor in order to acquire their loyalty or support, and introduced social insurance scheme and obliged the government to provide jobs for to all university graduates. So it established the state played like the important or the preeminent role in the economy in organizing its relationship with market player, especially the mainly here the workers and then the business communities. If we go back to week 5 and then week 7, I think, when we discussed the corporatism under Sadat as well, how actually Nasser and brought the created the Egyptian Confederation of chambers of commerce in order to organize the relationship between the state and the different chambers of commerce, and then the how actually streamlined or established the monopoly over industrial sector and over the Federation of Egyptian Industries by creating this centralized representative body of manufacturing managers that actually brought together private and public managers, or like managers from public and private sectors. So this actually introduced or like represented or manifested like initial thought or belief about the role of the state in economy, in managing the economy and mobilizing resources and allocating the resources. I hinted at how like the free officers regime tried to or actually established this import substitution industrialization that vested priority in industrial sector or heavy industries, but without with potential of like encouraging exports, but it didn't actually lead to the this purpose, or didn't achieve this target. um, so the state, they actually they tried to establish after abolishing the monarchy and trying to negotiate the British authority for complete evacuation in order to establish the post-colonial state, or the inheritance was kind of all like the investment or the resources were allocated or concentrated in cheap agricultural commodities, um, and that actually didn't require any kind of skilled workers or workforce. So they didn't have any kind of incentives in order to invest in education or acquisition of new skills, because like backward kind of agricultural sector didn't need this kind of skilled workforce. um, and then like they tried, especially in Egypt, with as we mentioned, like the position or the cotton actually occupied important position, uh, like exporting cotton played important position, or helped this integration into global market without actually helping with establishing like a wide industrial base. So the military officers or the military regime actually campaigned in order to achieve kind of advance on the three fronts. How to actually modernize or to make use of the agricultural sector in order to feed into the industrial one, and how to improve on to achieve kind of improvement on human development indicators, and most especially education. And then they had like initial plan about like encouraging this kind of industrialization for export purpose. So in the meantime, they were kind of suspicious. They had like the kind of suspicions of the private sector, because the private sector, the Egypt had like like kind of capitalist considerable kind of capitalist development before the free officers took over power. But for them it was like financially still like financially weak, so they were not able to plan for the economy, or to allocate or to mobilize scarce resources. And the mainly like especially domestic business communities, they focus mainly on like commercial or trading sectors rather than industrial. There were kind of or attempts of industrialization, but in terms like wide industrial basis, they didn't manage to create this. And the free officers had the main target of creating this broad or massive industrial base. And the actually they were interested in short term, for them, like the as a pattern for short term profits, rather than achieving any kind of structural transformation within the national economy or the domestic economy. Um, so actually they had like for them, for the free officers as well as a military regime, so they were actually skeptical about this kind of connections between like domestic bourgeoisie and foreign capital, because they had like this tendency towards exporting their capital rather than reinvesting domestically, to reinvest the profit, their profits domestically, in order to help with the economic growth. So that's why the military regime had to campaign in order to achieve kind of like economic achievements on the three fronts. So the the regime actually took like quick actions after reaching power. So out of this kind of the belief about the powerful interventionist the like the importance of like this interventionist role of the state with large public sector. So it had like to improve or to establish the planning capacity, and to enable the state with kind of institutional setting and financial resources in order to allocate and to invest more resources in industrialization. So the first measure was taken through land reforms measures. And actually, it was like gradual, but it started, right away, like a few months after they took over power. So in September 1952, so the main target was to destroy, the power or the resource base of the landed elites, especially the Wafdist elites that dominated politics after 1919. And in order to undertake kind of modest redistribution of rural assets, um, out of belief that this distribution of some economic resources would help, by taking out or taking some of the rural assets from them. This would like help to place funds in help rural capitalists would get incentives in order to place funds in industry, using the because they achieved kind of bonds as a compensation for the lands the state forcibly grabbed, and any other like earnings they had. So in order to make the agriculture pay for industry. So the main thought was like to undermine the power basis of like the landed elites in the rural areas, and to offer some, to stimulate them to invest some of their money or financial resources into industry. So you have here like it talked like especially after the socialist decrees in the early 60s in 1961. So you have here from Waterbury, like it's from 1952 how many like fedens the state expropriated from landed elites. And it took like several steps in order to achieve like full control over lands in the rural areas. And then they had as well like the Revolutionary Council. They moved quickly in order to push through after like pushing through this land reforms. So they started discussing like they started like discussing about having kind of feasibility study of constructing a giant dam in Aswan in order to ensure this kind of constant and steady supply of water, especially in summer, and to protect the or to offer more protection for power supply, and to protect Egypt from like against flood as well. So they started actually to think more about securing financial resources, and like offering or establishing one source of like hydroelectric power in order to be like a major or the main source for power supply, that the one like Egypt lacked. And then they established kind of committees or institutions or organizational structure in order to plan for these projects. So they created this permanent council for PCNDP, permanent council for the development of national production. That was the forum in which all of these decisions actually were discussed or deliberated and then taken. So the permanent council actually gathered some technocratic ministers and technical experts with some subcommittees, and it had some consultation with the private sectors as well, most especially Misr Group and the Federation of Egyptian Industries. So they had kind of consultation with the private sector as well. So they didn't actually confiscate all of these resources once and for all after they achieved power. It took several steps, as we are going to see. It took the great or the greatest push happened after the nationalization of the Suez Canal in 1956. So the permanent council as well advocated other heavy industrial project to establish a fertilizer plant, for example, in Aswan as well, in order to draw on the hydroelectric power generated by the old dam. It was like an old dam there, and then they had a project. They thought early on about Helwan iron and steel complex. So they had this plan in head, and they started to by trial and error in order to achieve these kind of industrialization, a plan for industrialization. Yeah, for the private sector, again, as I mentioned, there had been kind of a consultation with the private sector, but again, there had been kind of mutual skepticism, and they were doubtful of each other. So the private sector actually didn't follow the revolutionary council's or the free officers lead, and meanwhile at the same time, the free officers as well as a military regime, they didn't had any confidence, or they didn't believe in the role of the private sector in economy. So after all, it was a military regime, and it was until the South the nationalization of the Suez Canal company, or the Suez crisis, that the it was kind of a uneasy standoff, or gridlock between the regime and the private sectors. But as it's shown here in the table, so you have here the public and private shares in industrial investment. So you have here from 1952 until 1959. So until 1959, 1960, so the private sector actually share in industrial investment, the shares actually were relatively or were actually higher than the public sector, or the public sector shares. So you see 22, and then 28, 22, 27, 41, 22, 30, 30 in comparison to 1.5, 4.6, or 6, 7, 8. And then in 1959, it was the public sector share skyrocketed to 49%, and then no share at all from the private sector. So during 1952, 1953, so the regime actually took serious steps, or initiated a series of laws in order to encourage domestic and foreign private investment, and offered some concessions for them. So the the main sources or the two forces of capital accumulation. So they needed, to get, some money in order to invest, in some sectors, and then they can use, the profits in order to pump more resources into other sectors. So the two forces were like, this asset transfers or grab by nationalization, especially after, the national aid. It started with the land reform measures, and then the series of nationalization and like major steps, were taken after the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company. And then you have like series of laws in order to offer, more concessions, to foreign and domestic private investment. So law, the law 26 of 1954. So basically, it revised, other limitations or constraints on the private and foreign investment, especially 1947 law. It eased, some of the regulations on the repatriation of earnings by allowing foreign investors to have or to take up to like 51% interest in a firm, rather than it was like instead like in the previous law or the old law, it was like 49%. And then the mining law of 1953, it offered, more incentives and allowed foreign interests to undertake new petroleum concessions. And then like another law in 1953, law 430, and then 25 in 1954, it offered like, more taxation, more incentives related to the taxation system. So the laws actually extended, the grace period or the tax holidays of 7 years to new industrial ventures, and of 5 years of existing, companies with a target, of capital expansion. And then the other law of 1954, it actually reduced tax rate on undistributed profits. That was like to help or to incentivize the foreign capital in order to invest in Egypt. And actually it paid off for some time, especially in petroleum sector and tourist sectors. But like this again, like, the mutual suspicion and especially the conflict of interest or the struggle between like the new entrepreneurial bourgeoisie that actually benefited from these measures or these regulations, and old, bourgeoisie that, especially, in Aboud, the most like, famous example with the sugar refineries and Misr Group. So the like, they grew suspicious, or of one another. So and like this hostility was based on the ideological ground. So like this kind of social transformation and industrialization, the state came to believe, or the free officers or the regime actually came to believe, that like industrialization or state-led industrialization with like, prominent role of the state to usher in, this radical social transformation. It offered actually for them the only solution to the development needs, and like they started, to marginalize, the private sector, especially like, but without, asking. Marginalizing them from decision-making process, while asking them to invest or to have a place for them for investment in industrial sectors. So the problem here for the state, how to secure kind of sustainable finance, and in order to regulate or to implement or to carry out its investment projects. So the Suez crisis and the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company, it offered like an opportunity for the regime in order to proceed even further with nationalization and asset grabs. So the regime actually applied this once and for all transfer of assets to public ownership through this nationalization and sequestration. Uh, so before actually taking serious steps with before taking these kind of serious steps of nationalization, the regime created this the if you remember the Ministry of Industry in 1956 in order to regulate or it offered it was an indication that the regime actually tried to entrench or to stabilize the role of the state in the economic matter. And then the regime started to take this radical transfer of confiscate the nationalization and confiscation of resources in order to secure physical revenues, in addition to the other revenues came from income taxes or sales and added taxes and custom duties. So they needed more financial resources. They needed more financial resources in order to sustain the state role in the economy. Um, so the and again, the state intervened in the economic domain or the economic in the economic activities by fixing or administering this pricing to control this intersectoral transfers as well. So the most famous example came with the sugar pricing disputes with Ahmed Aboud, when actually he rejected the state interference. He monopolized this sugar refineries sector or industry. So the state intervened in order to break his monopoly over the sector by nationalizing the assets, his assets. And then the state started to take to initiate or to promulgate laws like 22, 23, 20, 24 of 1957, like to nationalize all the banking sector, like all commercial banks and insurance companies or commercial agencies for they had their activities in foreign trade. They were fully Egyptianized in management and capital. And in order to the state the existing institutional configuration didn't have the capacity or the organizational bodies that would actually manage all of these assets. So the state had to manage these public with the inflation or the increasing size of the public sector. The state had to establish kind of new organizations in order to manage these assets they took over. So the first one, it was in 1957, the economic organization. It was holding it actually gathered it took over or it had control over many French and British assets, and it was like a public holding company. The main task or the main tasks were to supervise all the existing public enterprises and other mixed enterprises in which public sector share reached 25% or more. And then by 19 after nationalization of Miss Group, the many other under severe or heavy pressures, actually, several firms, in Masr Group and Aboud Group entered into the association, into like an association with the economic organization, as we're going to see. And then, in addition to like these, like the umbrella or the main institutional body was the Ministry of Industry. It was like, even before, like it reflected, this regime intentions or willingness to replace private sector in, like, promoting with like public sector in order to promote the Egyptian industry. So, and then, like, the regime dissolved, this the Permanent Council of National Development Planning, and created instead the National Planning Committee. In the same year, the economic organization was created as well. And then it was divided into two main bodies. The first one, the High Council for National Planning, and it was actually attached to the presidency. So it was like, under Nasser's supervision. And then the original National Planning Committee that actually acted as the High Council's executive arm. So after the dissolution of the PCNP, any kind of formal interaction with the major private sector spokesman came to an end. So actually, they totally marginalized, if you remember the table, like by 1959, they had like no share at all. They had like no share whatsoever in the industrial sector. And then the Ministry of Finance, it was like, a civilian, kind of a civilian enclave that actually offered, kind of supervision on like exchange rate and this allocation of resources as well. But again, like the Ministry of Industry asserted its dominance over the economic organizations, and sometimes, it bypassed, the finance and plan ministry as well. So the one, like, the one of them, the main advocate of the public sector, or the like, increasing size of the public sector, or the heavy role of the state in the economy, was Aziz Sidqi, that actually was in charge of the Ministry of Industry. And it was like very difficult to be contained because of his, like, forceful or assertive personality. So he rejected, any kind of institutional checks, and this affected, the planning as well. So sometimes, as we are going to see, the second 5-year plan was like, it was never implemented. So because of this conflict between different institutional bodies, and he gave, like, Sidqi actually in 19, after creating, these institutional or these organizations, without, like, clear kind of division of labor or responsibilities between them. So he actually refused any kind of institutional checks or deliberation with other institutions or other organizations. And in 1958, the Ministry of Industry actually was empowered in order to rule on to give license, of the establishment of any industry, public or private, and any existing, existing industries were never allowed, to extend or to change location or activities without getting an approval or permission from his ministry. And he actually invaded, the domain or the terrain of the economic organization. The most famous example came with when the ministry actually got control over the industrial bank from the economic organization. So it was like the kind of when it comes to carrying out or implementing, the economic policies, there had been kind of conflict between jurisdiction or the domain, the authority domain of different organizations. So the first like 5-year plan, it was like declared in 1980, in 1950, in 1958, 1959, and the plan was for 1960 till 19 through 1965. Um, so obviously, there had been like no consultation at all with the private sector, as I mentioned. They didn't have any dialogue, although they had like some, as I mentioned, some place reserved for them in order to invest, or to invest some resources, some financial resources into some industries, like and they focus mainly on like textile, sugar, construction, heavy engineering, steel, chemicals, and fertilizers. And they achieved like they managed actually to absorb or to generate roughly 1 million new jobs. And they did like fairly well when it comes to improvement of human development indicators. And they achieved like the growth rate actually reached 6% annually during the first 5-year plan. And then in order to the private sector actually was because of these like they didn't feel comfortable about these kind of heavy nationalization measures, or the processes of like confiscation and expropriation. So that's why the state had to take some like legal measures in order to enforce like this private sector cooperation. So they reserved place for them to pump money into industrial sectors, but they refrained from doing that. So that's why the state had to enforce that by law. So the law of 1959, according to this law, it obliged kind of joint stock. Um, so the law actually forced the companies to invest 5% of their like their net distribution to stockholders in state bonds. So instead of like the non-distributable like these kind of the net they didn't distribute to stockholders, so they had to invest in state bonds. This would like limit the profit distributions. So Mr. Group as Mr. Group like owned the largest textile center, especially like the one in Al Mahalla Al Kubra. The regime actually nationalized Mr. Group, and then the regime nationalized as well what's called like the central bank. So it was like, or Ahali Bank actually. So it was like it's a national bank of Egypt that it actually was founded in 1891 by private, Jewish entrepreneurs. And its main it functioned or operated as a central bank by issuing currency, and but it remained like a private sector institution. It didn't like it was not like a part of the state or the public sector. So during 1950s, the national bank actually obtained or had the power to control the flow or the volume of the credit in the banking sector, and to offer funding for the marketing of the cotton crop. So after the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company, the National Bank actually refused to carry out the mission of the distributing controlling the flow of credit, or financing, or finances the marketing of the cotton. So the regime had to take like some coercive and repressive measures, and it absorbed it into the public sector, and created the regime created a new like central bank But the Ahali or the Ahali Bank, was allowed to exist as a commercial bank. And then, the like after these all these like nationalization measures uh, happened, even before the declaration or the declaring the socialist decrees in 1961. So by 1961, so no one no one expected, before after these kind of heavy handed measures and this kind of massive asset confiscation. So no one expected that the state, would take in any, further measures in order to kind of to transfer more assets. But actually, the socialist decrees it was the socialist decrees actually were issued in 1961, and it allowed for the nationalization of all the remaining, especially for the banking sector. So all the remaining, private banks and insurance companies, they were they were all nationalized, and some other shipping companies and firms in heavy and basic industries. And then the law, the decrees actually the socialist decrees actually after this kind of declaration, the regime actually initiated or undertook some legal measures in order to oblige some like more than 80 companies to sell like 50% of their shares to public agencies. So by law, they were enforced to do that, to sell their shares. And then Nasser actually led the groundwork or put the foundation for what's called Arab socialism. So it was the similar policies were embraced or adopted by other regimes in the region, especially like populist leaders, to some extent in Tunisia, in Algeria, and in Syria. And after the union with Syria, he took some nationalization measures, and he applied this kind of socialist measures, but not like many of his reform measures actually were abolished after the broke apart. And then regional by 1961, so the state actually became the dominant player in the economic activities. It controlled roughly every sector, all the sectors, and it actually so from the banking and insurance companies had control over foreign trade, strategic, and heavy industries, as I mentioned, like textile, sugar, refining, and food processing, the transportation sectors as well. So the state, owned the uncontrolled, the sector, and the agricultural credit and the agricultural inputs, fertilizers, and certified seed and pesticides, and the even the infrastructure assets, and the construction companies, and several assets the High Dam and the Suez Canal and the ports and ports facilities, they were actually under control of the regime or the state. And this left it was remarkable, and it left heavy legacy, and it was very difficult for any for subsequent regimes actually to turn or to downsize. Even after downsizing the state role, the state actually did exist, and it was very difficult to allow for market mechanisms to work or to operate freely without any kind of state intervention, as we are going to see. So with this increasing size of the public, or the growing size of the public sector, according to like Waterbury statistics. So the public sector actually uh, had control over like 40% of the total output, and 45% of domestic savings, and 90% of gross domestic, capital formation. So like the state and the private sector, like, dominated, the all the economic activities, from like, planning to resource mobilizations to like investment to like, allocating again, the profits. So the managing the assets, the state had to create or to support existing organizational structure with another organizations in order to increase or to enhance, the planning and organization and administration capacity of the state to administer, all these economic activities, or the to have control, or to manage, all the extensive public sector. So like besides the economic organization is still there, that was established as like a holding company in 1957. The MISR organization, as well as I mentioned, like, the after nationalization of the MISR group, so they had an Abud group as well. They entered into an association with the economic organization, and then like the MISR organization was in charge of like managing Mr. Group assets, and then Nasr organizations that actually I think like managed more than like 40 or 45, companies that became like, assimilated or integrated into the private, the public sector. So the state now like had control over like, economic activities and different sectors, and the state had to secure kind of financing in order to sustain industrialization, and to make, more profits, and to put, these profits in existing, public sectors. So the securing, kind of financial resources was like cornerstone in order to sustain, this import substitution industrialization, and to encourage, like domestic savings as well, in order to increase, to sustain, this import substitution industrialization for more 5 year. So by 1965, actually, they had the plan for deepening industrialization with export potentials, but the budget constraints and the financial limitation actually prevented this from happening. It was the plan actually was never implemented. Um, so it was like totally like the manifestation like of economic underperformance, like if you remember, like when we talked about the military expenditure and the deficit, the balance of payment deficit, like go back to the week 5 lecture. So it was like, the regime didn't manage actually to balance, imports and exports. So they didn't have like, they didn't have this export oriented strategies that ended up with like, the deficit, of the balance of payment on trade, on visible trade. So you have here from 1960, 66, it was like with minus, and it continued even until mid 70s, the mid 70s under Sadat. So they didn't actually diversify new sources of investment, and they have like limited resources. So they didn't have like, like enough like oil resources, for example, to continue or to sustain, this like a second 5 year plan. Like, so they have like, the alternative source of capital, or alternative force of capital accumulation. So the regime resorted to external borrowing or deficit, financing, and it didn't help, with with implementing the strategy, because they didn't have, like, they didn't generate, sustainable resources. And especially when they resorted to the Soviet Union, for example, it was the Soviet Union was reluctant, to support Egypt financially. And labor productivity as well, especially after the socialist decrees actually reduced the weekly working hours, to 42. And in addition to, the skills needed, so this led to, like, this led to lower labor productivity. And for export performance, the when it comes, they had problem with the implementation of the plan. So they didn't have, like, clear organizational structure that was in charge of implementing economic policies. And there had been, kind of conflicts between them, and problem of, as I mentioned, jurisdiction and final authority. What kind of, like, institutional body was in charge of implementing these policies. And again, like, the this pan-Arabism and the outbidding, for like the leadership in the region, that eventually led to the June defeat. It actually didn't help. Egypt actually descended into this, like, economic recession, and they had to take some measures in order to revise or to undertake some revisions in order to minimize or to downsize the role of the state. So like it had, like, so the second plan, like, was never, like, implemented. And it was, like, after June defeat and this kind of negotiations, with the like indirect, negotiation with the Israeli government, and the mediation of the United States, and how Nasser, if you remember, like, had to resort to the Soviet Union in order to get some military equipment. So he was busy, with, like, recovering or reclaiming, the territories, that were occupied, or Sinai that was occupied, by Israel, and, like, overhauling the military, and getting, more military equipment in order to rebuild, the Egyptian army. So they shifted, the focus away from like, import substitution, industrialization, or economic activities. And he, like, intensified his effort in order to reach out to the Soviet Union or to the Arab leader in order to get, some financial support or financial resources. Until, like, it was like that until his death. And then, like, when Sadat actually came to power, and he tried to, like, starting from 1971, he tried, like, after 1970, and Sadat actually came to power, and he had, like, different orientations. So he actually de-aligned, with the, like, Eastern Bloc, and he tried to shift, his alignment to international alignment to westward to the United States. So he had, like, different, orientation, and that's why he had to take, some serious steps in order to recover the economy. So the first, legislation, or the first step, came with the law 65 of 1971. It was, like, for foreign investment. It offered, like, a 5-year. The law actually tried to offer incentives to foreign investors in order to invest, money in economic sectors inside Egypt. So it offered, like, 5-year like corporate tax grace period, and it established as well free zones, and allowed, the degree of some sort of autonomy for joint ventures between foreign investors and public sectors. This foreign capital, that was, like, in order to encourage, foreign capital, and it became even, like, more permissible, or after the war, after 1973, in order to rebuild the country, in order to encourage, to rebuild the economy. So the Sadat actually took some serious steps in order to liberalize the economy by, as I mentioned like before, he submitted, the October paper in 1974 to national referendum in order to achieve like economic prosperity. So the state had to pave the way, or to give, some sort of support to uh, private sector. And then like the most important law to single out was the law 4043, because it actually it offered more like uh, legal, or it liberalized, the private sector, even like the private companies, or the sectors that they had, like, they had kind of partnership with public sector firms, with the majority share of the equity. So according to this law, it liberated, the private sector from the labor laws. According to these laws, if you remember, it allowed for workers' representation in the management boards, and profit sharing formula, and they had, like, minimum wage. So it liberated, this private companies from the salary ceiling applied to the private sector. And the law as well, it actually it offered or placed, priorities of investment that would feed into this self-sufficiency, or the self-sufficient in foreign exchange, and promote the export promotion. So especially in the, it didn't help, but that was like the main or the initial target. So in order to promote, exports in technology and management techniques, and to put an end, to this public sector monopoly of the banking. Okay, so the again, like, liberating, private sectors from the labor laws, and then offered more like space for to liberalize, the banking sector, and offered, priorities of investment. And it created as well, like, investment authority within the Ministry of Economy, in order to be in charge of more stimulating measures, like tax exemption for from 5 to 8 years, to duty-free imports. Um, like it offered, some duty-free on imports of equipment and raw materials needed for production. And it created, like, these kind of free zones. Actually, it offered, this duty-free like facilities. Um, but again, like, it was very difficult for Sadat regime to take, like, this kind of shock therapy measures, or radical, economic transformation, or radical economic measures. So in February 1977 workshop, they had, like, the Sadat's regime actually considered some revisions of the law number 43, the one here, in order to bring, some modification, and initiated another law. It was, I think, law 32. It removed, more obstacles for foreign investors, in order to yeah, it was like, according to law 43, like, any kind of foreign project transferred in Egypt, it had to be through, like, the Egyptian bank, and according to or at, this kind of official or fixed exchange rate. So the new law allowed for the exchange rate that prevailed at this time of transfer, that offered, kind of, it didn't lead to any devaluation, but it gave, like, this sense of devaluation of the Egyptian currency, in order to encourage, the foreign investors to transfer projects, or to have, their own projects. But the most important thing, like, they debated or deliberated to what extent, the size of the private sector, what's the right size, they should give, to the private, to the foreign investors, or to the private sector. And they had to still, to legitimize this in light of the National Charter of 1962. So according to the charter, it stated that the charter actually stated that the majority of industries, within the framework of public ownership of people, the majority of industries had to be, like, within this, like, framework of public ownership of people, like, quote unquote, the framework of public ownership of people. So the thing is, like, any kind of private involvement, according to the charter as well, the allowed for any public involvement, kind of was allowed, as long as, the majority of the projects remained under public ownership. So still, like, if the public sector, had the majority of shares, or, like, remained, the in control of these, like, joint ventures, or like, any kind of partnership between public sector and private companies, or public sector and private companies. So the it's okay, according, they tried to legitimize or justify this, it's okay, and it's still, like, it still fell into the domain of public ownership, as long as it had, like, this majority, the public owner, it has, like, the public sector had the majority, or in control of the entire project, or the entire company. So they allowed for, but they had, like, two disputed, they had, like, two disputes, or they had kind of contestation over two main issues. So the first one was, like, the joint ventures. So some proponents of, or advocate of, like, joint ventures, especially, like, in banking sector, so they justified this as, like, it's still, like, fell into, the domain of the charter, because still the banks, operated in local currency, and Egyptian, ownership of the Egyptian ownership, didn't, go below 51%. So they still, like, they had, like, a kind of conflict between, like, proponents of Infitah and like, advocates of public sector. And then in agriculture as well, because the deterioration of the agricultural sector pushed, some of the supporters of Infitah, and in order to call for, like, more opening for foreign agribusinesses. So in order to allow, like, foreign investment to bring, some financial resources, to bring money, and to invest in capital, they had, like, access to capital resources to invest, in the agricultural sector, and advanced technology, and like, the marketing, and profitability, the foreign investors, they were in a position, to cultivate, new commercial crops, and but how they, again, they disagreed on how small, like, the size, how small scale, private cultivators, could be. So they had, like, like, 2 points that actually they needed to legitimize, every single like, liberalization measure in order to conform to the charter, or in order to give, prominence to the private sector, to the public sector over the private sector. and to not to violate, especially for the agricultural sector, not to violate, the rights of the poor peasants, because this is like the cornerstone of like the free officers regime, like how to support workers and peasants. Um, and then they started after, they took like, more laws that allowed for liquidation. They didn't actually, some observers during that period, um, they actually came to the conclusion that the state or the Sadat regime actually, by encouraging or allowing, foreign investors, to invest their money, or to by allowing for like joint ventures between public sector companies and foreign investors. So it had been like, kind of conviction that the public sector, would be dissolved or be totally dismantled. But actually they allowed for kind of liquidation of some weak like sectors, and it was like forbidden, to any of the sector to diminish its share or to downsize, its share in any state-owned enterprises below 51%. So again, like, they had like, this limit. And then they had like, they offered the state or the regime actually, or the legal measures offered greater latitude in handling, the labor forces. And so they were not like, they were no longer obliged, to conform to the labor law. So everything like the state didn't like, rush into, or the regime didn't rush into, this kind of privatization measures. And it took even Mubarak, actually he was cautious. So it was like until like, mid 90s, they started, to take serious steps, by for selling off, the public sector. So they had like, they again, like, because of this kind of deliberation and because this kind of deliberation between different, proponents and opponents, so they disagreed, over like whether or not, to liberalize, the banking sector. And they offered, some space for joint ventures and for like full service, bank with by 1976, in order to offer, like some greater flexibility in determining or adjusting actually the interest rates. So they offered, some space for foreign like joint ventures, in banks and as well like offshore banks as well, to deal with the foreign exchange, not only local currency. And they were allowed, to make like, to have like, credit policy regarding credit and local investment. But again, like, despite like, these kind of liberalization measures, still by the late 1970s, after like, the even after like, 5 to 6 years of applying, law 43, so the public sector banks still like, in terms of the volume of deposits and investments, is still like played, the central or held the central stage. They played the pivotal role, including, the banks, the specialized one for agricultural credit or mortgage finance, or industrial banks as well. So the state as well is still in control over the financial or the banking sector. It offered, more favorable conditions, for this duty-free privileges for foreign investors, but these kind of policies were abused, because it was initially for importers, for foreign investors, to invest in the country, but actually importers, made use of this duty-free policies or privileges. And Asian, for example, textiles, especially like, for in textile sectors, flooded, the Egyptian market, and it harmed, domestic products and industries because of these imports. So this actually created kind of conflict of interest and a diversity of interest, not only between like, private sector and public sector, but even individual managers, especially in textile sectors, for example. So some actually supported, this reaching out and dealing with the like, foreign investors, and others, they tried to assert their control or over, the entire public sector. So still, like, that's why even like, Mubarak, like, and all like the facilities still didn't generate like, like considerable or significant job opportunities, because they were like, concentrated in service sectors that actually, it was not like labor intensive, industries, and it didn't generate, any job opportunities. So that's why Sadat actually had to resort to the United States in order to get, more financial support or more financial aids. And then Mubarak had to deliberate, with the oppositions in order, some of them actually asked to turn on some of these Infitah policies. As I mentioned, when Mubarak came to power, he had to deliberate, with the opposition to apply austerity policies, and to what extent he could like, proceed further with Infitah policies. So more on Mubarak policies, and then like, how actually he managed to sustain, his dominant position or his control, even, like within a context, of economic deterioration, and how like, intensification, of capitalism, or like, the emergence of crony capitalism actually affected development strategy or trajectories, and like, to what extent it actually helped or accelerated the pace of mobilization in 2011. We have 2 lectures in order to cover these points. For now, that's enough. Bye.